Welcome to the Architect of Your Life in the section of Talking About Parenting with Lourdes Garcia. Today, with a very special guest, Vittore Pan Kessler.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show. This is Radio Quantica, our first English program. Woo! This is Let's Talk About Parenting with Lourdes Garcia. I am a conscious parenting coach, and I'm doing this show to promote consciousness between mothers, fathers, and just let you know that you can be free, you can be in control of your own life. You don't have to live around your children the rest of your life. You can just find yourself between the cows and become free. So this is my host today, Vittore Pan Kessler.
Hi.
Vittore began her studies in business management and continued her education in urban studies to increase her knowledge of how societies operate and what leads people to places, power, and perception. From a young age, Vittore was involved in many volunteering projects, helping vulnerable groups of society, with particular emphasis in working with refugees and ethnic minorities. That's something I want to talk about, Vittore. Throughout her early years, Vittore worked with refugees from war-torn countries whom she helped voice their needs and expose to new opportunities for integration into society. Her personal drive, energy, and ambition saw her working in a leading architectural company as well as marketing and events industry. Vittore's passion has always centered around social interaction, communication, and helping others succeed. Her unrelenting determination to support the most marginalized members of society drove her to change career paths and furthered her studies into introductory counseling to help women and girls that had experienced sexual and gendered violence. Vittore is a poet and a mother of three beautiful girls that led her not only into learning about conscious parenting, but becoming a conscious parenting coach. So, Vittore, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction.
Today, we are going to talk about your journey, your experience as a woman, as a mother, and how you became a conscious parenting.
Yeah.
So, I understand you have a really big heart, that you are so social centered, and I wanna start asking you how this refugee theme began in your life. How this started as your first call.
Well, at the age of 8,
Mhm.
I became a political refugee into the UK. So I myself became a refugee, and when we moved then into central London, it being a refugee had a lot of stigma attached to it. So people had already created judgments of who you are and where you came from, and you were treated with the attitude that you should be incredibly grateful to be in the UK, and that your life in the UK is much better off in assumption to the life you had before. There was no regard at all for the life you left behind, the family that you left behind, the emotions that you feel as a child, who's just been taken out of everything familiar and into a completely new context. So having had that personal experience, that drove me very much towards helping others that came into the UK. I started actually in my secondary school, where through a charity at the time called Children of the Storm. And at that time, there was a big influx of children coming, unaccompanied young minors that were also coming from Kosovo, from Albania, from Somalia, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so forth. And it was my interest started in helping those children integrate into life at school and then society in the wider context. So that's where the interest started. And I think because I was in their shoes, I think I felt a great passion to make their life slightly easier by what I had learned from my own journey.
That's really interesting. I've seen this really frequently, like from our own experiences and from our own needs, we find the courage and we find the strength to fight for something. Um, do you think it's made a difference in your life, the fact that you could volunteer and help other refugees to embrace your own condition as a refugee and overcome that?
I think to embrace my experience as a refugee was very difficult because I did feel very excluded, and I did
Mhm.
feel very sidelined and not understood. I didn't think there was enough support for me as a child then. We were just literally put in the same group as all the English speaking children, and you just had to get on with a culture that you'd never heard of. And that experience then I think helped me in being able to empathize further with the refugees that then I came into contact. And I think it helped me have a greater openness to their struggles and a greater understanding to where they were and how they were going through life and the difficulties and the challenges that arose from being a refugee and a minority, and into that being, living, because when you come into a different country as a refugee, and I came with my family, so I was very lucky in that sense that I had my parents with me, but
Mhm.
at the same time that brought with it a duality of living in two different lives. So outside the closed doors of my family, you live the life of the English way, and then behind those, then you live the life of the Albanian way, which was more or less dictated by our traditions and our way, our values, and the characteristics of my culture. And then it was learning to integrate both those two cultures and trying to be a whole. And it was very difficult at first because you're trying to identify at the same time, who am I? Because you're growing into teenagehood and just identifying you as a person. But then it's like a matter, because people would say, as soon as they'd see you, so where are you from? Who are you? And as soon as they'd hear my name, no matter how well you spoke English or how well you presented yourself, your name dictated that you were actually a foreigner and you were treated as such. And with that experience, I wanted to help people feel, integrate sooner rather than later into the society that I felt I didn't have the support to. So, yes, I think having had that experience did enable me to feel what somebody goes through in those shoes.
Yeah. I'm feeling um, this experience also helped you in your motherhood journey and your conscious parenting journey,
Mm,
because it seems similar in a way that we all have an inner self, and when we're growing up, everyone says, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you don't have to be like that, you um, in a way you get excluded from being you, and you
yeah.
get forced to being like them to be accepted. to be accepted even by your mom, because she does it with a good intention, but she does it anyway. so
Yeah,
so you have to find yourself, and you have to live like this, two lives, maybe one for them and one for you, inside your heart, inside your soul. And then you grow up and you find yourself with kids in your house asking for acceptance, and you don't even know who you are anymore.
yeah,
So it's really difficult to start finding yourself in all of that, noise and opinions and feelings.
absolutely. I think in terms of my own parenting journey, I whoever asked me, oh, so would you like to get married and would you like to have children? And I said, of course I want to get married. Of course I want to have children. I want to have 4 children, and I want to have a big family, and I want that, vibrancy and that versatility that I experienced in my culture, and that warmth which I romanticized very much when I came to the UK. And it's interesting that we talk about patterns and about mothering, because my mum worked with children very young. So did my aunt. And I actually started working as a nanny to support myself through university. And I always thought, well, actually, having children is going to be a breeze for me. It's going to be very easy because I've seen my mum do it. I've seen my aunt, and I've also worked as a nanny for all these years. So having my own children is going to be absolutely no problem. And I also had predetermined my daughter's name, because culturally, where I come from and the way I was particularly conditioned is that when a boy is born, the father is going to choose their name, and it's their right to choose the boy's name and so forth. So I thought that I was going to marry an Albanian. And when I marry an Albanian, I will have the privilege to name my daughter. And I thought, when that girl is born, my dream is going to be born, because to have a girl was my dream. So I created this name, Leandra. And in my language, Leandra, it means a dream is born.
Oh my God, so
I,
beautiful.
when I met my now husband, I said to him, if we ever have a girl, her name is going to be Leandra. And I explained to him where the idea came from and so forth, and he was in agreement. But the reason I give this example is how we create those children that belong in our fantasies. So I
Yeah.
already created a fantasy way before I was even with the father of my daughter, my husband. And I'd created this idea of what my child's life is going to be like, and how our relationship was going to be like. And when she was born, she really was a dream. She's an absolute perfection. But simultaneously, I was very heavily conditioned to what a mum should look like, and what a child should look like, and how our relationship should look like. So when that started to show its frictions, I got a bit confused, and I was like, this doesn't make much sense, because I've ticked all the boxes. I'm following the rules. So why isn't my daughter like overjoyed in her life? And the first that I remember is when she was in reception, and I went to pick her up, and all the other children would be so happy to see their mums and dads. And I'd go to pick up my daughter, and she'd start crying. She didn't want me to come, and I'd think, why? Why would you not want a mum that really wants you, and my life revolves around you? And I didn't understand it at the time, and I just treated it, oh, she just wants to be with her grandparents, or she wanted to be, playing more and so forth. So she didn't give me as much challenges. And again, to go back in the influence of my mother, my mum said to me, "So do you want to have more children?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I do. We really want to have more children, my husband and I." And she said, "Oh, you should have them very close together, because when you have children together, you'll raise them together." And of course, me being the obedient daughter, I said, "Oh, yeah,
Oh my God.
that makes so much sense." So I fell pregnant with my second daughter very soon. So Leandra was 6 months. So their age gap is 15 months. So they're only 1 year apart.
That's a really big challenge.
That is a big challenge, but that just goes to show you how we take on directive from our parents and how our conditioning really does drive our behavior, and how unaware I was that actually it wasn't me making these decisions. It was
Yeah.
my culture, it was my familial influence that was making these decisions for me, to the extent of even having another child. And I remember having Allegra, my second daughter, whom I named, both my husband and I chose to name her after Allegro in Italian means fast in music, and
Uh-huh.
joyful and energetic, which she truly is to her name. And again, with my idea of what my child will be like. And simultaneously, I also unconsciously really wanted a boy, because I had a girl, and the only, now my husband is an only child, and I felt that I owed it to him to have a boy so we can carry on his name. But all this
Mhm.
was happening in a very silent and unconscious dialogue in my unconscious state. But yet I was creating this life that I thought I wanted. And it was actually through my second daughter where I started to realize that maybe this is not exactly mine, but I still didn't push it as hard, and I still followed the path of what was expected of me as a mom, what was
Mhm.
expected of me as a wife, as a daughter, as a friend, and so on, without realizing what were these conditions that were pushing me. So, my conscious parenting journey, if you want to move into that,
Yeah.
started actually when I moved. No, just before moving to Italy, I started my introduction into counselling in working with gendered and sexual and gendered violence, refugee women. And there I was really interested in the holistic approaches of healing, and how, the difficulties that women are faced with, and how culture actually stigmatizes even healing. So even going to see a therapist or a coach was perceived as, you're going crazy, that's why you need to go and see somebody. And a lot of
Yeah.
people actually have the courage to enter into that space of healing because they feared the way they were going to be judged. And a lot of the time, even these women that I worked with weren't allowed to enter those spaces. And the ones that did, we had to be very, very sensitive to their ability to come in and to actually open up. So it took a lot of time. And simultaneously, I had two girls, and I was becoming more and more aware of what happens to girls and what happens to women and girls of different countries. So not only my experience as an Albanian girl, and now
Mhm.
that was raised in the UK, but I was also understanding what women of other cultures were experiencing, and how, unfortunately, violence was quite rife in treating women, and how patriarchy dictated so much of their life. So I started getting these ideas, and I started thinking, well, trauma work is something I'd be very interested in pursuing. And I would look at my girls and sort of think, oh, you're so lucky that you don't have to endure the things that these women had to, or maybe even things that I had to endure as a young child. Um, and I took a bit of a break because it was work wise with my husband. We moved to Italy, so it was my first time that I moved away from my family of origin. And I'd never done that before since, we came to the UK together, and we were very closely knit together because we became each other's support systems in a foreign country. So
Yeah.
going to Italy was the first time that I was sort of on my own, and I started realizing where I stood in my own 2 feet without all these people around, and how life is perceived slightly different. And it gave me a great opportunity again because I had a wonderful social platform of international community, of meeting other women, and how their life panned out, and what brought them to where they were, again opening my eyes to yet another different perspective of a different culture. And but yet I still always had this sort of niggling voice, because even in Italy, it's still quite patriarchal there as well. And a lot
Yeah.
of Italian women would see me with my two girls and would say to me, "Oh, so when are you going to have a boy?" I kept thinking, oh my goodness, I really need to have another child. I need to have a boy, because that is going to prove my worth as a woman, as a mother, and as a wife. And I have to, have this. I have to have this boy. And I was so sure that when I conceived in my third pregnancy, that it would be a
A
boy.
boy.
I was 100% sure. I was 100% sure that it was going to happen, and that was that. And so we discussed with my husband and said, yeah, should we have a third child? Oh, yeah, da, da, da. Okay, fine. And I remember flying back to the UK so I can get the test, because I was so eager to start planning and preparing my vision board of what my life with my two girls and my boy is going to be like. My sister had two girls and a boy. My other sister had twin boys. So I was like, I'm definitely going to have a boy.
It's happening.
Happening for sure. And I did the test, and then there was a nurse that called me, and she said, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Pankessler." And I said, "Hello." And she said, "Oh, we've got the results in, and oh, everything's fine, and the baby's fine." And she said, "Do you want to know the gender?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I do." And she said, "It's going to be a girl." And the disappointment that I felt,
Yeah.
pain that I felt, was, I cannot tell you how incredibly difficult that moment was for me. And I was very, very sad. I was very sad because I was like, that I thought was my dream yet again. My part of my fantasy is not coming to reality now, because I'm not going to have I don't want to have any more children. And now this is my third time of trying to have a boy, and it's not happening. And that sent me in a real down state. So I started feeling like I'd let myself down, and I'd let my husband down, and I'd let my family down. But I didn't know. Again, this was all noise that was happening, internal dialogue in myself, but very disappointed. And further to that, when I would tell my extended family that I was expecting yet another girl, the way that was received was, "Oh, with pity,
Oh, no.
sorry." Yeah.
They were
That,
really helpful.
oh, very incredibly helpful. And that made it even harder to digest.
Yeah.
But in a way, I was really, really glad that I found out so early into the pregnancy, so I can emotionally and mentally prepare myself for the arrival of my third baby girl.
Yeah.
And this is where patterns will come and show you that I'm a third daughter in the family.
Mm.
So, and a lot of stigma and a lot of judgment came with me being a third daughter. And so when I gave birth to Elena, I was holding this beautiful girl in my hands, and she was just a light. She was absolutely just full of love, and just gorgeous little girl. And I looked at her, and my whole being was in love with this child. Yet my mind was saying, why aren't you a boy? I wish you
Yeah.
could have been a boy. And this is where the schism started with me. And this is where really the third time I was being knocked into consciousness, because I couldn't understand every molecule in my body. was screaming with love and joy for this girl, this light that I was holding in my hand, this great gift. Yet my mind was again saying, I wish it was a boy, and I couldn't understand it. So that's where I started my conscious parenting journey, and I heard of Dr. Shafali, and I started reading The Awakened Family, and then I went to do the Conscious Parenting Mastery course through Mind Valley, and it was incredibly powerful to enter into that journey and realize that actually what I was feeling was mine, but what I was thinking belonged to my culture, belonged to society, belonged to the expectation and judgments that others had placed on me and my mother before me when I was born a girl. You see? And
Yes.
that's how I embarked in this journey at this. So it was because it was so painful for me to hold a child that I loved so dearly, and for my mind to say, "But why aren't you a boy?" And
Yeah.
that's how I started into it. And one of the questions into the Conscious Parenting Mastery course was, how did you envision yourself to be as a parent? And I had filled in these questions, and I was still having this reflecting in this question. And my husband had come from work that evening, and I said, "Darling, how did you envision yourself to be as a parent?" And it's quite interesting because we'd been married for over 10 years. I can't, 11 years, I think, at the time, 11 years. And we had 3 children, and we'd never had this discussion. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I never thought I'd have a family." And I was sort of taken aback, and I said, "What do you mean? You're married and you have 3 children and you never thought you had a family?" He said, "Not really," because he said, I didn't believe that I had the nurturing skills and the skills that's needed to raise a family." And I said, bearing in mind, again, 11 years into a marriage, 3 children. So I was like, "Oh, so what changed your mind?" And he said, "Oh, meeting you and your family changed my mind because I saw how you were with children and I saw how your parents were with children. And I thought, yeah, she knows what to do. It's absolutely fine. And we can have a family." And that grew me because I was very surprised because I thought, again, culturally, where I come from, I believed, and the way I grew up, I believed you get married to create a family. And that this man had married me to just be with me sort of didn't didn't fit into what my boxes were saying should have happened. So it became so I started thinking further into it, and I started thinking, what else have I acted upon without knowing whether on assumption and without me actually really questioning where that was coming from? Was it a part of me, or was it a part of what was expected of me from a patriarchal society, from being a third girl? And that's where I entered into the conscious parenting journey. And I thought, I need to figure this out. This requires a bit more work. And it has been the most enlightening journey I could have ever embarked on. My understanding of my behavior with my children and with the choices I've made in life has expanded beyond any insight that I had previously with therapy, because I'd attended therapy before, and even with my counseling, it's a different approach. This is a much deeper way of looking at, but much quicker way of understanding where you are and what is actually driving your behavior.
Yes. Um, it what surprises me, not in a way of a new thing, because it's actually a very common pattern, but you have this attachment of the value of you as a wife bringing a boy for someone who didn't expect anything from you, anything at all, not even having children. He
Absolutely.
was he was being surprised in his life, and you were suffering just because. Just
I was.
because.
I was suffering without even know that the suffering was actually very much brought on to me by the unspoken expectations that were there from even before I was even born.
Yeah.
You know, this go interlinks with the ancestral heritage that I inherited from my lineage of what a woman is supposed, what makes her worthy.
Yeah. Have you found out what value did you bought all those beliefs? You bought them for you. You chose them and you brought it into your life.
Yes.
So, what value does that brought to you?
Well, you see, this is another thing that I thought I chose them, but I
Uh-huh.
didn't, because I wasn't aware that I had a choice. I thought that was the
Oh,
way. I
that's
thought the
the
way
only way.
that was the only way. My
Uh-huh.
grandmother did it that way, my mother did it that way, and you were a good person in service of the other before you were in service of yourself. That made
Yes.
you a good person. You were a good wife if you know, gifted your husband a son that could carry on his name. And you were a good wife if you were, you know, you could raise these children in a healthy way, and you were a good daughter if you cared for your parents and you cared for the wider circle. There was no point where I believed that I had a choice to be something else. This was the ultimate choice, or the only other choice was to be less than, and to be less than meant not to be married, not to have a career, not to have children, because women at a very young age, so even when you were 25 and you're not married, they're like, oh, you're not married yet, oh, what's wrong with her? There was a lot of, again, I come from a very judgmental culture, look down upon you when you didn't tick those boxes. So I believe that the only choice I had was to follow that prescription that had been put before me. And it was to, you know, you grow up, you go into education, and you start, you finish your whatever your chosen discipline is, you get married, you have children, you become a wife, you become a mother, and then you start your, you know, you continue, not even start, your duty of service to others. So those, to say I didn't even know that I had it, it wasn't the beliefs that I brought in, it's the beliefs that I thought were the only beliefs and the best beliefs you could have.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's similar to our culture here in Latin America in a way that it's really patriarchal. Patriarchal. How do you say that?
It's patriarchy and it's patriarchal. The patriarchal.
Yeah, it's really patriarchal, and uh, they. I'm kind of a rebel girl, so I didn't follow every path, but they do impose you your path, and they do expect these things from you,
Yes.
and it's it's really painful and really difficult to
Mm.
do something else because you
Yeah,
get excluded.
absolutely. You
So
pay a price.
yes, it's really expensive actually being a
Well,
rebel. Yeah.
I
So
can very much relate to that one.
yeah, and uh, so I wanted to ask, since you became a conscious parent and since you began your journey discovering this inner voice and changing, what's the most difficult thing you've faced from that moment so far?
I think one of the most difficult things is realizing that there was a choice, but I wasn't aware.
Mhm.
I wish I had been more aware of the choices. And I wish I had known that these expectations weren't mine. and to actually, I've always, part of my coping and survival in life has been writing. So I always wrote in poetry form, and that's where my true voice lies. And through that, I think that also helps me to again see the world from the other person's experience. But in my term, it was living the pain that came with being born a third girl.
Mhm.
But at the same time, learning now that actually there are cultures that celebrate being born a third girl. So it's really interesting because in South Korea, if you're born a third girl, you are asked for your hand in marriage before they even see the girl. So this was a tradition before. So this, it was a really interesting to hear from somebody that I'd met, a friend from who was born in South Korea, and that when I was born, I was my grandmother. So continuously, I was told as I was growing up, my maternal grandmother would say to me, "Oh, when you were born, I cried because I knew that your mom would have to have another child until she had a boy and she'd be going back to hospital." So at the time, I didn't realize that I internalized my mother's pain. And,
Yes.
that was really difficult to understand. But I'm really glad that I challenged what culture expected of me. And I challenged that not only in the sense of having the three girls, but I also married outside my culture. So, when you say about being the rebel, I very much, when I married an Englishman, it wasn't very well received, and it wasn't celebrated in the same way as had I married an Albanian. So I challenged the idea of who I should be. And it actually came from a time when a lot of people were like, "Oh, you have to choose. Do you want to be with the English or do you want to be with the Albanian?" And I remember at this time, and I was like, actually, I want to be with myself. And
That a
I
girl.
made that decision. But that was all. There were only moments of, as I could say now, consciousness and awareness where I actually came into me and allowed myself to make that decision. But to relate to you what was the most difficult, and to relate it back to when I was born a girl, I wrote a poem, if you would like me to share it with you.
Yeah,
um,
sure.
and it was about coming into consciousness about when I was born a girl, when I actually allowed myself to go into the journey of conscious parenting and really listen to the little girl inside of me. When I was born a girl, when I was born a girl, I lost my right to speak. When I was born a girl, I was labeled as weak. When I was born a girl, I lost the right to love. When I was born a girl, culture fed the mourning dove. When I was born a girl, I lost every interest in me. When I was born a girl, I was the boy that would never be. When I was born a girl, I was taught to shut down. When I was born a girl, I was greeted with a frown. When I was born a girl, I was taught to live in shame. When I was born a girl, I learned that even when faultless, I was the one to blame. When I was born a girl, the rivers cried in waves. When I was born a girl, my mind was buried in caves. When I was born a girl, I was my mother's pain. When I was born a girl, the streets were flooded by rain. When I was born a girl, I was the cause of every fight. When I was born a girl, I was the dark to the light. So that was my most painful awareness, I think. But at the same time, the most rewarding, because it's good to be able to know what drives me. Who am I? Where has this come from? Where has this fight come from? And to know that actually this is quite a long fight that not only belongs to me, but I think the many women that came before me that were so voiceless, that couldn't say, couldn't stand up for themselves and couldn't really enter the journey that I've entered, that I've had the liberty and the freedom to go into. But with it, the awareness has come, and also it has meant losing people around me and losing what I didn't realize were just illusions.
Yeah, it's it's despite being a beautiful poem, it's really painful, and it makes easy to relate and to feel in your own way, in your own experience, the same pain we all women have in all our lives. I was recently told actually that that I have the wrong personality because I am like my father and like my grandfather,
Oh, wow.
and and I shouldn't be like that because that's an ugly personality. And even they aren't telling me that it's wrong that I was born. It's actually painful, and this thing, it's a really big conditioning that we all share as women
Yes,
in all cultures actually.
absolutely.
Has this changed your relationship with your husband in any way?
Oh, absolutely. Not only with my husband, but I think to start even before my husband, it's changed my relationship with my mother incredibly. And it has made me realize how deeply enmeshed and codependent I was with my family of origin, and how little space I actually gave my marriage to my husband. And when people even asked me, so if I met somebody who knew my family and who knew me, and they say, "Oh, Vittoria, hi, how are you? And how's the family?" And my immediate thought would be, "How's my mom? How's my dad? And how's my brother? And how are my sisters?" It didn't occur to me that they were asking me, "How is your family?" i.e., your husband and your children. And that's how deeply enmeshed I was with my family of origin. And I didn't even realize that that was, and this is what I mean about having the awareness. So once that awareness came, then I started to create more breathing space between myself and my mum, between myself and my siblings, between myself and my husband, and all the other relationships that I had surrounded myself with. And it was through this understanding that I could actually get to know myself a bit better. I'm still in the learning stages, and I think I will be forever learning. But it has changed all my relationships, primarily my relationship to myself. The
That's
way
the
I
most important one.
it is as we reflect it outwardly, and
Yes.
I've learned a great deal in that, and it's one of the things that came to mind. It's before the conscious parenting journey. I remember my middle daughter, and very again culturally, we are driven very much about outer experience and how you portray yourself to the world externally. What you have inside, nobody questions, but how you look on the outside. So if you
Yeah.
present perfection, that means you're a perfect family. And we were going out to dinner, and my daughter was about 5 years old, and I had bought these lovely clothes for them because, again, I was filling in the beautiful picture that I had of what my girls should look like and how they should be presented to my friends. So I wanted her to wear this particular outfit, and she said, "No, I don't want to wear it." And I was really baffled. I was like, "Why don't you want to wear it? It's so pretty. Why don't you want to wear it? It's so beautiful." And she just looked at me. She said, "Mummy, clothes don't make people beautiful." And
Oh,
you are absolutely 100% correct. From that day on, I had one requirement for my children: to be clean. Can we at least be clean? You can choose what you wear and how you present yourself in form to other people, but please, can we at least be clean? That's one boundary that I think I put in place. But she actually really awoke me to the idea that, oh my goodness, how much was I conditioned to be presented in a certain way? Even when you entered my home before, I would drive myself crazy because everything had to be really pretty and really nicely presented and really clean, because other people will judge you for being X, Y, and Z. So when my daughter said this to me, it was a real jolt into the present moment. And I was like, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the difference between becoming a conscious parent and being like previously, where I made my other daughter, who did not actually push against me, I made her get dressed in that outfit. I told her and she agreed, and she didn't. So, and I didn't think there was anything wrong because she agreed and she did it as I asked. But the middle one, she was like, you are learning your lesson today, madam. And I did. And I've carried that through. And now I always remember, I go, clothes don't make people beautiful. Outer appearances don't make people beautiful. So, yeah.
Children are wise. They
Oh,
have
absolutely.
something to teach us.
They have a lot to teach us if we're willing to listen to them and not let ourselves get in the way. And
Yeah.
actually, not even our true selves, is allowing our ego to get in the way. And I still catch my ego very much active. And I have to kind of pull it back and say, oh, whoa, 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 Fitora, come back, because that's just ego and fear of rejection that's pushing you that way. But let's see what's really happening.
Yeah. I have a very important question for parents, and I want to know, if you become a conscious parent, if you go into this journey, if you face these challenges, these fears, does this have an effect on how your children behave? Does this make them better daughters, or just makes you a better person? Does this have an effect on how they behave with you, on your relationship with them?
Absolutely. It actually opens up your relationship to form in true, authentic connection with your child, as opposed to the child, like I said, my dream child before me in her perfect clothes. Instead, it has really allowed me to see my child with all her vulnerabilities, as opposed to questioning. So with my oldest daughter, she doesn't talk very much. She's more of an introvert. She holds herself back. And each time I was pushing against that, trying her to come out, trying to be more like me. Why can't you talk? Why can't you interact? Why can't you make more friends? Why you've got everything? Trying to get her to see the world with my mind, with my eyes, with my conditioning, and forgetting that she's a child, and she can only see as far as her development can allow her to,
Yeah.
and B is her own person. Just because she silently witnesses the world and appreciates the beauty doesn't mean that she doesn't appreciate it, or that she is less than because she's not as loud or is not as expressive. So it has really allowed me to take a step back and allow her to be herself. And each child, now with Elena, who's 4 years old, the youngest one, he's got a very different mum to what the other two have had.
Mhm.
Because the other two, I was driven by routine, I was driven by structure, I was driven again by society, again by conditioning. Whereas with Elena, I look at there are certain boundaries in place that we need. So, about cleanliness, one, and eating and sleeping and so forth. But ultimately, I allow her to evolve into the personality and into the person that she is choosing to be, not who I want her to be. And that's the difference. Before, I was very much driven with the idea of how you should behave with your children and who the children should be, and that dynamic and that hierarchy that I'm the parent and I tell you what to do, you are small, you are there, and there was no room for me to view the child in any other way. Does it change their behavior? Yes, it does. My daughter has started to talk a bit more without the fear that I clearly must have been imposing on her. And my other daughter is more, she interacts differently. So the behavior is going to be different, but it's also recognizing, are you performing for culture and society, or are you actually willing to engage with the child that's before you? Because before the conscious parenting journey, I didn't want my child to talk back to me. I wanted my child to dress and be the way I expected them. I wanted them to have the manners that I thought, were acceptable to society. Even if actually behind closed doors it was okay with me, I was like, oh no, but when we go to a restaurant and these people see me and they're going to judge me for different reasons. So does it impact their behavior? It does. But you've got to choose what is important for you. Is it important for you for somebody to say, oh, those children are so perfectly presented with such a perfectly, looking relationship and so forth? Or is it to truly have that love and connection with each other, even if it looks really messy on the outside?
Because it's essence.
It's essence. It is essence, but it's also just understanding that essence doesn't come in a perfectly packaged box with a bow on top. Essence comes with its all, with its all its edges and all its quirkiness, and children are still forming, and we allow them to form in their way. I still have to remind myself, especially when you're trying to get out of the door and make sure you're on time for certain meetings, or you're on time for school and so forth. Sometimes you just wish you could just yell a bit louder for them to hear you, but then you've got to remember, why are you doing this? Who are you doing it for? And then that changes your perspective, and it changes your behavior.
Do you feel more freedom in your life?
I do, because I'm more carefree about other people's judgments, and I'm more concerned about my own understanding and actually hearing what my wounds are saying, and understanding, where am I operating from? Am I operating from a place where I was hurt as a child, and then I'm trying to actually protect my children from that hurt? Or am I operating from a parent who's got the best intentions and is actually doing it because this child wants to live in a certain way and so forth? So I forgot the question.
Do you feel more freedom?
Oh, more freedom, yeah. I do feel more freedom, much more freedom, because as I said, I'm not as bothered anymore about if other people say, oh, but your child is really loud and crazy. And I go, yeah, it's okay. It doesn't bother me.
Because they are real children.
Yeah, they don't come out of a showroom. My God. So whereas before it did bother me, I wanted them to be, these perfect beings, and I wanted them to be viewed in a certain way. So yes, I think freedom comes with that.
Your parenting, it's been easier in the last years or more difficult because now you have to think of yourself first?
It's a good question. Has it been easier? I wouldn't say it's easier. I think it's different.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different approach, and the ease, I think, comes in the knowing that what you're doing, the way you're operating, comes from an authentic place, and that you're actually understanding what is happening internally before you get into that interaction with your child. So I think it's less guilt, which with itself makes life easier, because there was a lot of guilt I carried with my children. So after telling them to be quiet and sit nicely and be rigid and so forth, part of me felt really guilty, because I believe that children should be free and they should be running around and doing their own thing. And so there's less guilt. There's less guilt about why am I doing this? And I feel more liberated in knowing that I am trying as hard as possible to interact with the child before me and not the child of my fantasy. I think that's really, really important. So I can't label it as easier, because they both have their difficulties, but the difficulties are in a different form, and it depends what you value. Do you value your child to be free, to be who they are, or do you value other people's judgments more than that freedom? So
Okay, yeah. So you choose. It's actually it's just a choice.
you have much more choice. So I think it relates to your question about, do you feel more free, and do you feel free?
Yes.
And there is more freedom, because you've got more choice, and it's a wider resource of how to interact with your child and how to grow together with your child. Because each day I'm still growing. I'm still learning from my youngest, from my oldest, from my middle daughter. I'm still growing. I'm still learning. And it's just trying to see the lessons that they gift you through your interactions.
Yeah. Okay. So we're running out of time. This has been a great conversation. um, when you work with another mother or father, um, in your experience, how do they go through this process? Can you see how they become freer, or how do you see the transformation when it's not about you, it's about them?
Mm. I think the transformation comes in raising their awareness, in understanding all these different voices that are creating the noise around us. So understanding what actually belongs to the expectations of culture, to the
Mm-hmm.
expectations of society, to the expectations of your family, and then truly understanding what is your expectation of you and who are you. And that transformation comes because a lot of the time we are so busy serving the other and not even knowing why. And when you learn, okay, now I have a choice. I have a choice whether I yell at my child, whether I actually sit and have a conversation with my child, and how I view my child. Conscious parenting creates choice. And that is important when you are struggling with your child, to know that actually you have a choice. And that choice can also be quite a resource in managing your own reactions, and also that interaction with the child before you.
So your job as a coach is to help them find their own voice, their own choices,
Absolutely.
and
And
not
also,
imposing what you have discovered in your life.
absolutely. And it's about figuring out who who are they, and where is it is, because I personally believed I was so clear and so adamant in my being that everything I held close to me, and all my ideologies and all my principles and all my characteristics were strongly mine. That's how embedded and how entrenched everything was in me. But a lot of that belonged to other people, and it belonged to these other voices that we're talking about. So it's helping identify those patterns also that we repeat. And we are not even aware. A lot of the things that we come in contradiction with is a conflict that has been within us. It's an unhealed part of us that really needs our attention and that needs to be raised into the foreground and brought before us. And that's why I say then we grow with our children, because we grow with the child within us, and we grow with the child that we've given birth to. That is, if you're a parent. But my work doesn't necessarily just stop in being a conscious parent with children. I believe we all have those inner children that were created from wombs, and we are there to raise those little children and bring attention to those little children.
Yes, because we can learn how to be our own mother, our own father.
And that's really important, because we seek that parent relationship everywhere around us. We seek that nurturing and that connection and that feeling of belonging. But in actual fact, we just belong to ourselves. So
Yes.
that's where the work is. It's working with ourselves, it's connecting to ourselves, it's understanding ourselves and what's driving the behavior, and just healing holistically, healing all parts of you.
Yeah, our hobby.
A whole, yes.
Okay. Um, this was a really powerful final message. Do you have something else you would like to tell parents to finish?
I would like parents to challenge the way that they were raised and really try to unravel what is the shadow that their upbringing left on them, and what part of that is replaying in their relationships now, in the present moment, whether their relationship is with their child or with their husband or with their partner or with their friends. Those relationships from our early childhood are being repeated every day. And my challenge to the parents before us is, do you recognize those patterns? And I think that's where the work really needs to come in raising the awareness to those patterns and understanding that we have a life outside those patterns.
Yes, we do. We do have a choice.
We do have a choice.
And that's a wonderful hope.
Our attention needs just to be focused a bit more and be brought to those things that we weren't aware of, because it's amazing how, as I said, patterns repeat in a chronological way or in emotional way or in so many different forms. And it's just good to understand, your expectations, what is driving them, what are you expecting in the future, what have you got in the present, and just really exploring that further and seeing if is the pain actually yours, the pain that you're carrying or the difficulty that's before you, is it actually yours?
Okay. Okay, thank you, Fittore.
Well, thank you for having me.
If someone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
I've got a page on Instagram and it's called How Do I, all in one, How Do I _coaching. And that's me. You can find me, How Do I _coaching on Instagram. You can direct message me from there or look me up as Fittore Pankessler. I think that should come up in the Instagram page. But yeah, you can get through to me on Instagram. I'm still in motion in getting my website out there, so not there yet.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for all your teachings and for opening your heart for us.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners, thank you for choosing us to influence your life, your brain, your heart, your soul. Thank you for being here with us this hour of your life. This is a pleasure and honor for us. And thank you for choosing Quantica Radio, and keep enjoying the music and all the programs we have for you. Thank you, and see you on the next show.